I'm John Barnes. I'm MD at Incisive Media. I look after all the digital stuff, and I'm also involved with the AOP as the chairman of the AOP. So what I'm sort of intending to do over the next 30 minutes or so is really share with you my kind of view on how you make digital sustainable. Okay, so I'm going to start with this sort of very obvious statement, which is, everybody is always talking about the amount of money that can be made out of digital, but any media company knows, if they look at their traditional revenues compared to their digital revenues, that for some reason, some unknown reason, those digital revenues aren't quite filling in the whole of the traditional revenues, whether they're print revenues or broadcast revenues or whatever they might be. And that's kind of strange. So why is that? And quite a lot of organizations, as a result of that, don't sort of make the switch into sort of putting staff to focus onto digital, putting that into a digital organization. And I think my kind of premise is that, that's very much to do with the fact that a lot of companies are trying to do what they did in the past, in the present and the future, and they're making some really sort of like glaringly obvious mistakes. So for example, in my business, advertising is a key revenue driver. I'll talk a little bit about how our revenue is made up later on. But advertising isn't going to work in the 21st century if we try and just have the biggest audience than anybody else that we're competing with, because that's going to be very much about a price purchase. It's going to be about competing with a big media organization, so in our world, maybe the FT. And we're never going to win if we try and sort of have the biggest circulation, as we might have tried to do in the past. It's very much about adapting for the future. And I think that's a Dalek. A Dalek can't climb stairs. Well, apparently, in the most recent sort of incarnation of Doctor Who, it could, which is upsetting the Dalek purists. But in principle, the Dalek, which was created in the 50s, had a fundamental flaw for the future. It couldn't climb stairs. So this sort of vision of the future, which is very scary, had a bit of a problem with it. So sometimes what we've done in the past doesn't work going forward, and some of the things we try and think of in the present to help with the future also don't work. Now, this is a chart that rather cunningly Gartner adapted from McKinsey. McKinsey originally called this the three horizons of growth chart. And basically what it was saying in its original incarnation is it was the other way around. Horizon 1 was basically at the left-hand side. So you had a traditional business that you were trying to defend, and while you were sort of doing that, you were having to create new opportunities in Horizon 2, and then Horizon 3 is when you'd actually reap the rewards of those. Now, Gartner rather interestingly turned it around and called it the hype curve. And they basically put the last phase at the beginning and the first phase at the end. And I think that's a very interesting sort of analogy for what's happening with digital, because if we take our own business, and I just move over a little bit to the next slide, if we go back to sort of mid-90s at Incisive Media, and if I just toggle back to that first slide, we had inflated expectations about what the internet would deliver for us. And in that world, what we were basically doing is we were trying to sort of basically make the internet a kind of extension of what we were doing with print, a sort of digital extension in the way that we might have sold supplements or those kind of things. If you go back to that chart, just remember that. Horizon 2, disillusionment and enlightenment. Well, the internet crash, everybody massively disillusioned, all these internet millionaires, they aren't going to come back. The internet's blown its bubble. You get headlines and things like Wired, death of the web's over because apps have come along. Well, we are very much in phase 3 now, which is extend and defend. I think the internet business, the digital business, as we would call it at Incisive, has sort of on this hype curve moved back into a growth phase. And the reason for that is that we're focusing, as are most other digital publishers, not on big audiences, on legacy kind of solutions to dealing with digital, but actually thinking about what we've got. We've got niche, valuable audiences, we've got data, we've got multiple devices. And how do we put those together to create a publishing proposition that's highly, highly profitable and therefore very, very viable? And it's no coincidence that in this last phase, which obviously was the first phase with the McKinsey chart, we've got all these internet millionaires, billionaires coming back. This week, is evidence of that with that $18 billion transaction. And I'll also note down at the bottom there, 1996, we served our first banner ad at Incisive. I wasn't there. 2014, we're coming up to nearly 2+ billion ads a year, in terms of what we're serving. And so how are we going to actually make use of that in terms of this niche, tight audience that's basically multi-screen? Okay? So I think I've set the picture well enough for you there. You get the idea. So if we look at Incisive Media's revenues particularly, 2012 is the point at which digital overtakes traditional revenues for us, print. We're a 3 kind of revenue stream company. We've got events, face-to-face events, we've got legacy print, and then we've got digital properties. And the chart down at the bottom there is just giving you some indication of the kind of revenue breakdown. So we're not totally dependent on advertising, but as you can see, advertising is by far the biggest component within our business, as is true of probably many of the media companies that are in this particular room at the moment. Now, in a multi-screen world, which is where we are now, just think about a typical Saturday afternoon at home with your kids on the sofa. I've got teenage kids. We're all doing slightly different things on screens. We might be coming together around a football match or a music sort of feature or a TV program, but we're all doing something different, whether that's actually interacting with social media on the screen, whether it's actually checking stuff out on a mobile phone, whether it's watching the main TV screen. Now, if you translate that into media, historically, there's been this sort of tension between content and advertising. Advertising and content have been competing for attention between each other. And I don't really think that's the case anymore. It's not really about a competition between content and advertising. It's much more now about a competition between activity and screens. What activity you're doing on what screens, and therefore how does that affect the media company in terms of what you're doing, what we need to understand what you're doing, and therefore how we can monetize you. And so, as this slide says, it's a Google slide that we've used at Incisive, quite a lot. You can get it on the double-click intelligence center if you're interested in getting the full deck. The majority of media consumption is screen-based, 90%, as they're saying there. And then consumers move between multiple screens to accomplish their goals, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So it's not somebody going onto a website, looking at stuff, and then making a purchase. It's often now somebody beginning on a smartphone, using a tablet, and then completing something on one of 3 other devices. As this slide says, 90% of all media interactions now are screen-based, which is why I would say we've had that super tip in terms of revenue from conventional media in 11 and 12 at our company. Only 10% of media interactions are non-screen based, with print, traditional media channels like TV, radio and newspapers down there. And then on average, you're sort of toggling around 4.4 hours of time between these devices. This is a simple breakdown of typical time spent per interaction. So if you think about the way phones are used, it's short, it's snappy. I'll come back to that a little bit time. Tablets are immersive. PCs or screens, TV screens, are actually either for watching or for spending lean forward time, actually doing work and interacting with the products. And then more importantly, if you're talking about screens competing for attention and activity, it's also the contextualization of what users are doing. If you're out in town, it's raining and you want to find a good restaurant for 30 minutes, you're not sort of going to go back to the office, go on an internet connection on your desktop PC and research a restaurant. You're going to go onto your phone. You might even use Foursquare to see if there's a great offer nearby. So the context of where you are at that particular moment in time is really, really significant in terms of driving that media interaction. And the sort of 4 key things that we are sort of looking at increasingly is how much time has that user got? Is that indicative of the device? Are they accessing something on a phone because they're time poor? What are they trying to do? Are they just searching? Are they trying to read? Are they trying to log on to a service? Is that going to give us some indication about activity so that we can actually make some good second guesses? Where are they? Are they on the move? If they're on a train, they might be on a notebook computer that in the office has an incredibly fast connection, but on the train has an abysmal connection. So is speed and a part of location. Is that an important thing to consider? And then what's the attitude or state of mind? Are they in leisure mode? Are they in work mode? Are they in buying mode? Or are they in entertainment mode? So, there's no secret formula for sustainable digital media. That's absolutely a fact. You can seek it till the cows come home. It won't happen because every company is a bit like a human being. It's got a unique DNA, it's got some history, it's got some present, it's got some future, and depending on the way your business has actually sort of historically come together, that's going to determine very much what you can and do in the short term going forward. But the truth of the matter is whatever the formula is that you have, it has to involve deep and narrow knowledge of your audiences, and it has to involve data. Data is basically the new mass circulation in terms of media companies. Now, what I've done here is I've just sort of given you an idea. This is a couple of sites. I'll just pan through them very quickly. My eyesight is terrible, but the red line I think is tablets, the green line is mobile devices, and then the blue line is desktop devices. And this is tracking different sites that we've got, and it's looking at activity by device during time of the day, and it's percentage of total activity. So if you look at that 9 o'clock peak on mobile phones for IFA Online, that's an investment publication for IFAs in the city. Basically, that's the point at which they're receiving email alert services, they're accessing them on the mobile device, they may be making decisions about what they're going to be doing today based on some of the news features that we've actually pumped through to them. You can see at that point, 10 o'clock, they're switching into work mode, they're moving onto a desktop. But that phone is what we're increasingly calling a backbone device. It's just there the whole time. It's like a heartbeat running throughout the day. And if you think about your own sort of media day, you almost certainly will end it by plugging the phone in to make sure it's got enough battery, and you will almost certainly begin it by it waking you up because it's the start of a new day. So that device is a device you will naturally fall back to if anything else is gone. But at different times of the day, you can see the tablet computer kicking into gear in the evening. That's either the evening commute, because they're mobile again, they may be reading Metro, they're meeting those kind of devices. In our instance, they're probably looking at longer form content, longer form features. They may be looking at tablet editions they've actually downloaded. And again, the backbone device, the phone's still there, but the desktop totally tails off. And the picture's the same if you look at different products. This is a technology title, V3. This is an insurance title, Post. And this is Risk, which is a high-level banking and finance title. The phone is there all the time. There's a work phase. There's a leisure phase in the evening. So basically each device has very different sort of peak time usage. It basically therefore has different use cases, it has different value propositions based on what the user's doing at the time, what mode they're in, as I said earlier. And as a result of that, very often, and you notice this particularly with kids, I've got an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. My 11-year-old doesn't give a monkey's whether he's on an iPhone, a Kindle, a tablet, as long as he can log in, and he remembers his login, even though he's only 11, unlike most adults. He's just using a device that's available to him because it's just a screen. And increasingly, going back to data and what's happening throughout a media day, that is what you're going to need to deal with in terms of your audience, because the delivery mechanism is irrelevant. It's access to the content is becoming the critical thing. Now, we've sort of gone a bit further with the Risk publication. We've sort of panned this out and we've looked very specifically at different times of the day. Down at the bottom there, you've got the different keys there, tablets, you've got mobile, desktop, etc. And then what you can see through the research we've done with our audience is what the different devices are, the combinations they're using at different times of the day. And you might wonder why at leaving work I've actually included commuter newspapers, but increasingly they're being read on tablets, and we're finding that we're retargeting people on tablets through things like Metro by actually knowing that they're a Risk.net subscriber, buying through programmatic trading, advertising on that tablet, and then hooking them back in their leisure time back into Risk.net to bring the value back to us. So don't sort of think it just about your own universe. Think about the other tablets and other devices they might be involved with. I'll put these slides on SlideShare, by the way, if anybody wants to borrow them later on. Now, getting to the meat of it, there's sort of two types of multi-screen use. There's the older person who will do it sequentially. I'm about to do my email on my phone. Right, I've done that, and now I'm going to do Facebook on my tablet, and now I'm going to do the shopping at Ocado on my notebook computer. I don't know why it's older people, but generally it tends to be older people who go sequentially. We're much more interested in simultaneous use as a publisher because obviously we want to increase overall usage, and if we've got people using devices simultaneously for slightly different things, that's really important. And the most important thing for us is really complementary usage, and the difference between multitasking use and complementary use is really very simple. Multitasking use is doing lots of things at the same time. So you might be watching a match, you might be looking at your friend's Facebook profile on a tablet, you might be tweeting about the match now and again, but you might also be looking at other match-related scores on your phone. They're different tasks. They're sort of related because it's in and around the leisure time, the football match. But in principle, complementary usage is really going from one device to another device, back to a device, and back onto a device to complete a task. So a good example of that might be, in our world, particularly email alert services. So you saw on that risk.net chart, on the post chart, the IFA online chart, we had that big spike at the beginning of the day where you have that primary email service firing out information to people. In a way, that's sort of setting the agenda for the day. The information we put in that device and that email and that communication, which we know predominantly is going to be opened on a smartphone or a mobile phone, is almost setting the agenda for that user for the rest of the day, because we're alerting them to things we're going to be doing, we're getting them to sign up for things, we're getting them to come back into the site. And that's giving us some indication of what that complementary usage might be. It's also really important to accept the fact that however much you don't want to do responsive design or HTML5 or do that M.dot upgrade that you've been meaning to do for the last 6 months, everything is starting on a smartphone. Pretty much every media interaction is starting on a smartphone, whether it concludes somewhere else. And I've given some statistics there about primarily what people are doing. So what it means really is that you can't assume, if you're going to make sustainable digital revenue, that you've got products that are in silos in the same way that you might have had a magazine supplement, a sort of special area on your website a sponsor had bought, and a webinar that people might register and go to. They have to be connected in some way because they're not siloed anymore because of the way people are moving between these devices. So basically, in a multi-screen world, you know, it's very much going to be based on a trusted relationship between the publisher and the user. Now, I think that's good because I think any publisher worth their salt has got a trusted relationship with their audiences. That might be that they're paying for the information, they value it enough to actually pay for it, they're a subscriber. It might be they're highly engaged, they're commenting, but basically the quality of the content, that premium content, is what the user trusts, and it's a place they'll go to get opinion and information. So that trust is a really critical thing to make sure that you're sort of leveraging in a multi-screen environment. It's essential that you're tracking users across devices, and increasingly you've got device attribution. You need, from a subscription point of view, from a user point of view, to be able to identify a user who's using multiple devices, so you can actually improve the user experience for that person and actually monetize them more highly. And I'll talk a little bit about MD5 hash and PPID, which sounds awesomely techy, but it's not. So we'll come on to that in a moment. So great example of that. This is an example from Ford. We did a test at the AOP in mobile advertising with Mindshare. Their client they put forward was Ford. And what they found in doing that is that people that are interacting with Ford ads would probably be exposed to the Ford ad initially on a TV campaign at night, on television, in leisure time at home. The next day on the train, either partly through curiosity or boredom or delays, whatever it might have been, they were then picking up the phone and they were sort of doing some searches in and around whatever it was that caught their attention in that ad, the mobile phone, first source of information. They were then using, when they get into the office, the desktop PC to book a test drive, to download a brochure, to request a brochure, but then reading that typically on a tablet computer or interacting with that on a tablet computer. So basically there was a very significant attribution between the TV ad, the conversions into the mobile phone use, the research, the orientation phase, the actual action phase where people said, right, I've got to come in and actually book a test drive, get a brochure, and then finally the sort of the research phase when they were looking at the brochure or actually following up on that test drive through the tablet. So that's a really great example, and I think if you go onto AOP website, you can see some data about that particular example. Now, it strikes me, I talk to a lot of ad agencies, and they're very bullish about retargeting, about audience extensions, about programmatic trading. A lot of time, they're totally confused by what it all means. And it's almost like a teenager swearing for the first time. They're using these big words, and they're not too sure quite what they mean, but it sounds really cool. Audiences are really, really vital to retargeting. They're really, really vital to programmatic trading. And guess what? Wake up, advertising agencies don't have audiences. They have potential customers and they have people they're trying to attract. They don't actually have audiences. So where are the audiences? The audiences are on our sites. They're in our magazines. They're on our phones. They're on our tablets. Because we actually spend a fortune building audiences, marketing to audiences, going back to that trusted relationship, building a connection between an audience and the brand, because the brand means something to them, whether it's first with the news, trustworthy, reliable, quirky, whatever it is, there's a trust thing there. So basically, advertising agencies do not have audiences. Publishers do, and as a result of that, publishers have a significant advantage in a multi-screen world. And it's basically, I saw somebody had a booth up at the front where I think they were sort of trying to get pictures with Austin Powers and all that kind of thing. He was the man who lost his mojo. Well, publishers lost their mojo in that middle phase. Oh God, the CPMs are a nightmare. I can't compete with the big boy. I've got to drop my rates. I haven't got enough registered users. Oh no, they're not paying for the content anymore. That was losing the mojo, right? Well, we're getting the mojo back. Paywalls are okay. People don't mind paywalls. 11-year-olds can remember passwords. That's pretty cool. Plus, we've got audiences that we can actually start to retarget ourselves using tools like PPID, Publisher-Provided Identifiers, which is a Google initiative. So anybody here that's using a double-click solution as an ad-serving technology can go and talk to Google tomorrow about PPID, which is awesomely cool, or MD5 hash, and I'll talk both about those in a minute. So basically, the goal should be embrace multi-devices, embrace multi-channel, basically understand which users are using what. Your most useful users are going to be using all of them. They're your most loyal audiences, so how are you going to access them and give them different things, and basically make them more loyal and more engaged. And you've got audiences and agencies and advertisers don't. That's a really important thing to pump yourself up with. So, well, there you go. That was so exciting. I had to have a little bit of music. So one of the ways we're doing that is we're sort of accepting the fact that devices have got different attributes. The way that you use devices are different. So it's pretty obvious. Phone, one-handed. Sometimes it's two-handed if you're texting, but mostly it's one-handed, one-finger digit. That sort of limits what you can do on it. It's also a very small screen. That sort of limits what you can do on it. But, it doesn't seem to be a barrier for making that happen. But it's definitely much more of an on-demand, compulsive, multi-function thing. I'm doing my email 1 minute, then I'm flipping into doing something else the next minute. I need to find that restaurant. What am I going to be doing in 10 minutes? So that phone is there. It's compulsive, on-demand, multi-function. A tablet is two hands. It's quite hard to use a tablet really properly without putting it down. It's no coincidence that most people use it in landscape mode, because most of the devices you can buy to hold the tablets fold very nicely to make it look like a widescreen TV. So if you're doing a strategy on your tablets that is only looking at portrait, think about the way people are using the phones. That's where the tablets. But tablets very much are gesture-based. They're linear, so they are all running at once, the various things on a tablet, as your memory tells you sometimes when the screen flicks out and you lose your app. But in essence, you're doing one thing at a time, so it's very task-driven. It's immersive. You spend quite a long time on tablets. Our tablet editions have probably got a dwell time of about 20 minutes, as opposed to websites with a dwell time of about 5 minutes. There's a really significant difference. And also, if they're designed properly, you're going to go through lots of pages of content through that gesturing. And it's very immersive, lean back. It's sort of reading time. And a computer is at a desk. Even if you've got a notebook, who holds a notebook and uses it? You've got to put it down, even if the desk is your lap. It's a type and a pointer, so you're not really using your fingers. Most laptops are not touchscreen. And it's multitask, so you've got multiple windows open at the same time. You're doing several things at once. It's lean forward, you're working, and it's very practical. You want to get something done. And that definitely is what we see in that sort of time chart about what people are using. They don't work all day on a tablet. They don't work all day on a phone because they can't multitask in the same way that they can on a desktop computer. So on the right-hand side of this chart, what we've basically done is we've made a really simple grid. This has helped us working with publishers, and we've basically said, look, wake up, a desktop computer has got a mail client on it, it's got the ability to have apps, it's got a browser, and it's got the ability to also have additions, whether they're page flip kind of products, there's a lot of people here with those now, or whether they're sort of more beautifully designed for things like Chrome or other products. But so does a phone. Phone has the ability to have a mail client, it has a browser, has all the same things a desktop does. It's just a different device that has different attributes. And guess what? So does a tablet. So what we're doing a lot of with our members at AOP, but also at a company Incisive, is saying the bottom half of that chart on the right is saying, okay, well, what's the strategy then in terms of the product set that you're going to put in and around this brand? And here there's a brand here called Computing. It's about 40 years old. It traditionally was a print magazine. It now is pretty much exclusively digital. There's still a very few print copies, but it's really not where we make our money. And you can see that, from a desktop computer or a tablet computer, a notebook computer point of view, we've obviously got the full website, the responsive design website. We've got editions that are delivered in HTML5 through a browser. We've got Chrome apps that people can actually use. And if you go down and look at smartphones, we've got, again, responsive designs to improve the usage there. We're using Google Currents a lot in terms of apps and tools, and so on. You get the picture. And really, we're not trying to fill all the squares in. We're not trying to sort of get a 9 out of 9. It's not like the Olympics or ice dancing. We're not holding cards up. But what we are trying to do is say, well, if there's a hole in this, why is that? Because you don't need to fill the thing up. You need to understand why you haven't filled the hole and what something else is going to be done with that hole. So, the Yoda, I think, is well renowned for being a small, powerful guy, tough creature. I don't know if he's a guy, actually. Maybe he's not a guy. So it's not really about size. It is about the quality of what can be done with that audience. And definitely large circulations, as I said at the beginning, are significantly less valuable to media companies now than they were 10 years ago for a number of reasons, but not least because, going back to that agency guy, he'll want to say, well, you've got 10,000 users and I want to buy this many adverts, so because you've got so many, I want the best possible, lowest possible price. So basically, volume drives down price in our experience. Volume circulations drive down price. It's certainly true of the internet. And the thing that actually drives price back up is targeting quality and what we call custom audiences. It's a phrase that Facebook have used quite a lot recently with some of their publisher tools. Increasingly, custom audiences are going to become the thing that we need to do. And actually, if you look back, I know I'm 50 years old, so if I look back to when I started in publishing, we did do split runs. We worked out all the people that were in the north of England versus the south of England, and we'd send slightly different inserts to those people because they were in a different print run to the people in the south of England, split run printing. It's no different really, but it can be done on a micro scale. An audience could be 2 people, it could be 2,000 people. But if it's 200,000 people, well, it's starting to lose its mojo a little bit, and it's really probably not quite the same thing. So we have invested very heavily in a product called Scout Analytics. We were working with Web Trends, which is excellent, but we did get rid of it, I'm afraid. And we replaced it with Google Analytics and Scout. We put Scout on top of Google because Scout allows us to do what I call the last mile, that end user attribution, which is really critical. And really, it's allowing us, as you can see here, to really understand what our users are doing, where they're doing it, what they're consuming, so we can improve the experience with them. So understanding who users are, what devices they use, when and where in the day, and why, is basically the heart of everything we're doing in terms of revenue. How is that going to make us more revenue? Now, a key part of that, rather arrogantly, we try to use the term owning the inbox. It might be better to use the term sharing the inbox in a sensible way with other important media owners. So owning might be the wrong thing, but you get the message. Now, the most valuable audience we've got, we know, are subscribers. So here's me, JB, a risk.net newsletter that I've sent through on an email. Now, I obviously know who I am. or I know who this user is because they've registered, I've sent them something. And we're starting to understand the fact that if we are able to use technology a bit more cleverly to customize that experience, we can actually get a much better result. And I'll show you some of the results in a moment. So prior to 2013, we had a very complicated matrix of brands, sub categories within brands. It meant that we weren't really able to deliver the email vision at scale because it was too sort of bespoke. So we've automated that whole system. It's not that big in terms of some media companies, 127 newsletter templates, 26 products. But basically it's all built on dynamic feeds and it's all linking back to the user. So obviously I know that email address, but we can also convert the email address into an alphanumeric code, or what's called an MD5 hash. So at the point that we register that person, we convert the email address into a unique code. Some people call it a UDID. It's slightly different to a UDID, but it's a similar kind of concept, that there's a unique identifier for that user that we've made into an alphanumeric that's encrypted to us. It can't be stolen by another publisher, but you could certainly encrypt your own MD5 hash with your own emails, so you could start to identify that person elsewhere. And what that basically means is whenever we see that encryption, whether they're fully logged in or not, we are then going to start treating them as a subscriber. We're going to start giving them information we know that is of use to them. So if I come back to dynamic templates, it's adapting to screen size, it's basically delivered to different data sets, it's using pre-selected XML feeds, it's dynamically inserting ads, either with Dart for Publishers or Live Intent, which is an email tool that we're using, and it's got specific tailored marketing feeds and messages. And basically the way it works is we find that user, we look at that identifier, we then basically go, right, okay, they are in the Incisive database, and then what are we trying to do with them? We were trying to retain them because we know that they aren't using the email alert service as much as they were, according to our data. Are we trying to reactivate them? Because they haven't actually clicked on a link for ages, they've just received the email, they're just opening the email and not clicking. Or are we trying to not send something to them because actually it's not of relevance to them? Don't tell JB in that instance. And that's all done on the fly in the same way that programmatic advertising is done on the fly with this MD5 hash. Now, I could take PPID and replace it with MD5 hash. PPID is the same thing. At the point a user logs into a service on a website, we write a cookie onto the machine. And whenever that email address logs on another device, we go, have we ever seen that email address before? And we start to stitch the cookies together to go, hey, that guy was, or that girl was on the email alert service in the morning, they're using this in the evening. So that increasingly when we're talking with our advertisers, we're able to say, look, wouldn't you rather buy John rather than John not really known on a mobile phone, a tablet, a desktop? So buy John, that's a custom audience. And obviously that's quite valuable because an advertiser can start to have different kinds of messages on the different platforms, rather like the Ford ad. Could be starting off with, why don't you download the thing, why don't you register for a test drive, those kind of ideas. It's a lot more efficient doing it this way. We haven't got any editorial intervention in daily emails other than what the pick list is from the CMS. So obviously the editors, going back to trusted relationship, decide what has to go in those newsletters. And they use the CMS to do that, but the email program, the email system is just pulling it out. They're compiled and dispatched to specific lists, and they were deployed to all of our brands within 3 months. It was a really quick, exciting, efficient process. And so if you look at risk.net, you can see when we started to deploy this, June 13th, this is just a daily alert. You can just see the significant increase in volume of pages opened and accessed and growth on that list. And we now know that 51% of all the people that we're sending a 6 a.m. email out are reading it in an email, mobile-enabled format and going off to do other things. In the future, we're probably going to segment it a bit more like by status. So are they a trialist? Are they a subscriber? Are they a trialist that's about to elapse? Are they a recently started trialist? Are they not a trialist or a subscriber? That kind of thing. And this concept of sort of owning the relationship with the customer in the inbox is really, really critical because obviously the email address is the key thing there. So right impression everywhere. And hashes across device and cross-platform. And we're tracking that back through things like Scout to actually see where the demand is. what people are doing at different times of the day, what the cross-sell, upsell opportunities are. And we're also then plotting it back onto the lifetime value of the user. So on the left-hand side there, customer lifetime value, how can we move them up that curve? Now, we've also used custom audiences in terms of private exchanges. We built a private ad exchange last year. Private ad exchange is basically locking out people that we don't want to just use our services without permission, so things like cookies being dropped on our users. So we're policing what's happening there. And we built that on the DoubleClick AdMail platform. And basically what it's allowed us to do is have very, very clear objectives. So we understand who our high net worth audiences are through some of these tools I described to you. And we're able to monetize first and third party data much more effectively to build that custom audience, that high value audience. So prior to the exchange, we were basically selling in verticals. So if I wanted lawyers, I'd put ads in the legal part. But what we're able to do post the implementation of the exchange is really to say, well, we can actually identify the fact that it's certainly in our markets, in risk management, lawyers are using risk management. They're part of the purchasing process. Private equity use a lot of lawyers for deals. So where are the lawyers rather than put the lawyer ads into legal? And that's what the private exchange is allowing us to do very significantly. So we're retargeting within our own network, in effect. And most inventory, as I said, is traded on data. And I think, we're a B2B company. We're still kind of slightly amazed when people come along and go, look, I can target somebody who looked at an ad. Well, that's great, but it doesn't mean anything, does it, at this stage? They've just looked at an ad or they've visited a website. So our sort of premise is that there's a flaw in intent and behavioural data which we as a publisher with an audience can solve. I've got 3 people here, Tim, Johnny and George. They all like sport, you can see what they like. They're all in essence the same person. Without first party data, without publisher data, they look like the same person, right? So basically what we think is important is the first party data, the first party demographics, which going back to publishers have audiences we have. And if we can lay that on top of intent data and behavioural data, we've got a much more likely match, a more powerful match, a more valuable match. And as it says down there at the bottom, I can identify computing registered users who've visited Auto Trader and have also viewed car ads. That must make them a more qualified high net worth car buyer. So basically, Johnny's my 11-year-old son. He plays games, he clicks on car ads, he's in a database about to buy an Aston Martin, probably. He can't drive, he hasn't got a bank account. George is my nephew, he's 13. He's a behavioural intender because last year when he went on holiday to Florida, hence the alligator, he clicked on lots of ads about Florida, but he also went to lots of websites about Florida because he wanted to get his dad to take him to see an alligator, so he had to do the research because he's 13. But he hasn't got any money and he's only recently got a passport and he certainly couldn't afford to pay for the holiday. And then Tim, my boss, we've got the data on Tim, so we can distinguish between the Georges and the Johnnies and the Tims because we're laying onto intent data, third-party data that you can pick up from anywhere, our first-party data, our audience data, which is what publishers have. You can buy data from Exolate and all sorts of people, so here's some examples of data, but more importantly, we're giving it that first-party data sort of sheen. So here on the bottom left, right-hand corner, I've got different types of post-user, whether they are subscribers, etc. And you can collect first-party data through using things like Quick Survey, if you haven't got it yourself. So are you or aren't you a purchaser of stuff, yes or no? And I mentioned this really, I won't sort of kill you on this, but basically advertisers don't have audiences, publishers do. And publishers can identify their audiences then on other websites if they use ad technology in the way that we're doing it. So we're extending or retargeting our audience out onto other companies' websites, including some of our competitors. And we're buying it programmatically through exchanges at a reasonably low price and charging a reasonably high CPM for it. We're also combining that with viewability. 41% of our real estate is viewable to users but isn't monetized. And typically, you can follow this demo page up when I send you the slides through SlideShare. You can see the way the viewable ads kick into gear and how they actually are monetizing the page much better. So 50% additional ads are served as a result of that. So that was a lightning tour. What have we learned? The data of who, what, when, and why. is what will be used to create custom audiences, and that's where the value is. Publishers have audiences, agencies don't. It's not about size, it's about basically constructing the best, however small, and selling it effectively for the highest prices. It's in buying our own data on other people's websites, it's giving us a real insight into just how valuable our first-party data is feeling, and it's giving us our mojo back. Desktop is irrelevant. It isn't the distraction. Mobile isn't the distraction, desktop is a distraction. So people going on about mobile sites and how they've got to spend time doing them, well, yeah, you do. Forget about the desktop for a bit, that's fine. Sort out the mobile part of the strategy. And CPM is a crap publishing metric. It rewards volume and scale, and it devalues high-value audiences, which is what publishers are there to do. Well, we didn't have much time. I hope I've given you some sense of what you can do. Get your mojo back, sell audiences, and think about clever ways in which you can make those audiences smaller and more powerful, not bigger. Thank you.